And we're live once again with another session episode feature of Angular Unfiltered. I'm gonna keep coming up with some word to describe the show while we're doing it. I'm Brandon T. Roberts on Twitter again, and today I have with me Bryan Wilhite. Did I say your last name right? Wilhite,
Yeah,
is that right? Okay.
that's it.
But yeah, first of all, I just want to say thanks for joining. We talked on Twitter a few times, just back and forth. But go ahead and
Yeah,
introduce yourself and let the people know who you are.
yeah. Well, thanks for having me on the show. This is great. I'm I've been on this thing since I started off with government programs, and I have to mention this because Sean Wildermuth, who's like a luminary in the .NET world, he has a show
Hmm.
called. He has a podcast called Hello World. It's called the Hello World podcast, and he has a sort of a life story for all of the people. And almost every one of the people on that show, uh, they get a computer from a family member.
Yeah.
That's their first computer. Well, the first computers I worked on came from the government,
Hmm.
came from government programs that my mother found, and that's how I started. So at like Los Angeles City College, at the age of 14, I started with Fortran, just learning, just doing that. So I have to mention that in this political climate, there's a lot of people out there that think that big government is always evil. But what I've noticed that big government prevents people like me from working, basically, from feeding children, our own
Hmm.
children, and having a livelihood. Were it not for government programs, I would not be here talking to you.
Yep.
I'd be like you trying to drive on a freeway, and I'd be trying to clean your windshield.
well, we're thankful for that. Thankful that that's not the case, but yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I come up to there. I went to UCSB, and I majored in physics, not computer science, and that was actually great because I was introduced to something called the personal computer. That was new back in those days. Then I went. I had an interest in graphic design. I actually started taking notes in physics and wanting to do the integral signs and all the calculus notation exactly the way it's in the book. I just found that fascinating, that sort of typesetting, printing. So I was into that. I thought I would be a graphic designer. And then this thing called the web came out, basically,
Yep.
and realized that I could do the what was the print preview in the graphic arts world, the print graphic arts world, could be a website. The thought process behind the value of just looking at something on your screen
Hmm.
suddenly had value compared to printing it. Because if you do something wrong with the print, you could they print it on film, and film costs money. So if you made a
Hmm.
mistake, it
You
costs money.
gotta do it
Uh,
all over again.
yeah. So that was great. So I actually was a travel writer for the Auto Club, and then I this wonderful sister named Natanique McLean. She was a recruiter that found my resume. She was saying,
Mhm.
"Why? What is this brother doing from Inglewood with a degree in physics?" So she brought me in. She brought me in, and that's how I started in the corporate world.
Hmm.
Uh, but from, I think, your point of view, I think you're coming from the computer science world. It took me
I'll pause you right there. I don't have a degree in computer science either. I came up through MIS, Management Information Systems. So it's a mix. It's a mix of tech and dealing like business, like the business aspects of it, and dealing with the technical part of it. So yeah,
like,
I looked at computer science, but I felt like the MIS would fit what I wanted to do better, which was deal with the technology and deal with the people. So
Yeah, because computer science has been for a very long time a celebration of C languages,
Mm-hmm.
and the problem of having a physics background is that there's this built-in, sometimes unrecognized or unconscious arrogance about being able to learn anything. But so it took me a while to figure out that all the mathematics that I learned in computer science, in physics, a small portion of that can be used in computer science, and that really
Mm-hmm.
starts off with in the beginning calculus, we have this thing called the finite series. The epsilon and n x is x to n to infinity, or x to n to some finite number.
Mm-hmm.
So that summation series, sequences and series, that is related to the for loop. Had somebody told me that back in 1996, I would have had a healthy appreciation for computer science.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, the computer science portion of the job interview was often used like a weapon against me to prevent me from working at that
Right.
company. I'm just going to say that, I'm not going to be bitter about it, because often these are indicators of a larger problem with the company.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of younger people concerned about these issues of diversity. They may think that the company is completely perfect, like Facebook is completely perfect or Google is completely perfect, and they just have this little tiny problem with diversity. And my
Mm-hmm.
counter to that is no. That little problem with diversity is an indicator. It's like if you were an investor trying to sell short in a company, that's an indicator to sell short in that company. That company's not going to last very, very long over the long run. It's an indicator of a larger problem related to imagination and creativity.
Mm-hmm.
But so eventually, I got into the corporate world as I started off at Trust Company of the West, of all places, and then I went into the world of contracting, and I started off with ASP. ASP,
ASP.
not ASP, not, but
Oh, not ASP.
ASP.
Okay, yeah, I had some time with ASP also, and I can say those were good
Yeah,
times of learning that for sure.
yeah, and so the ASP was uh, well, in web standards. Okay, so I can't remember how I got into web standards, but I began to develop early on a deep respect for web standards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that came from the need for XHTML. Because with XHTML, you can treat a user interface like data, which was a novelty at that time. The idea that a user interface could be data, like
Mm-hmm.
HTML, the HTML that we use on the page can be treated like XML. So there was a standard before HTML5 called XHTML. There is an XHTML5 standard. But the reason why that was important is because we could use a database to project XML
Mm-hmm.
and then inject that XML into a website. So Microsoft called that dynamic HTML. And effectively, from a stock market point of view, nobody cared. And then a rock star at Google, comes along and calls it Ajax, and that's when it took off.
Yeah.
So Ajax
They just had to choose a catchier name. That's all. That it was they had to wrap it and catch your name.
Yes, and then also, when a technology affects the stock market, then there's a certain respect for it. If it doesn't have an effect on the stock market, it might help somewhere, it may not. But so with Ajax, I think I started messing with YUI. Now, the big problem that I had from a Microsoft point of view, now I was a Microsoft person. Let me quickly explain this. I know I have only 30 minutes. Let me explain. Microsoft, had I been just a few years younger, I would have gone to the bookstore and got a CD with Linux on it. and I would have started off in the world of Linux. I would have probably been a Linux person because why? Because it's cheap.
Yeah.
And one thing I learned coming in,
it's free.
yes, yes, yes. So the one thing I learned that I think the rule still applies now to the next generation coming up is the more you know, the cheaper it is. Right. The less you know, the more you have to pay for certain things like code camps. But the more you know, the cheaper it is. And I just so I would have gone to Linux. I would have been a Linux person. But Microsoft was the Linux of that time, meaning that I could walk into an Office Depot off Figueroa, just walk into an Office Depot. You know, I can buy Microsoft Access for $99. Now, this was probably later found to be against the law, antitrust, Bill Gates antitrust. Just look that up. Because the next competing product was like $400. Lotus Approach was like $400 something dollars. So that's why I'm a Microsoft person. I'm not a Microsoft person for like bro social reasons. It was cheap at that time. It was Bill Gates made it possible for somebody to walk in off the street and learn how to use a computer. If I were to try to come in through the Oracle route, we're talking like $100,000, just minimum. I mean, it was, so that's why I'm Microsoft. But Microsoft has something called SQL Server 2005. And that version of SQL Server had a 4 XML clause. And that's when that's when I was in business at that point. I could take data and project it as XML. And now I'm in a sort of a poor man's world of Ajax. Now, I could not find my bros in the world of ASP.NET web forms because several early versions of ASP.NET web forms were not standards compliant with HTML. It was always breaking HTML. And that was a cultural problem built into Microsoft. Again, remember that small indicator of a larger problem. Their lack of respect for HTML standards was a part of a larger problem of their lack of respect for the internet in general. Bill Gates had 2 or more editions of the Road Ahead. And I'm almost certain in the first version of the Road Ahead, he did not even recognize the existence of the internet in any way that we can recognize it now. So Microsoft systemically had a disrespect for the internet entirely. And that was a big problem. So ASP.NET Web Forms was basically a way to get Visual Basic 6 people on the internet with no respect for the internet at all. So it took companies like Google and Yahoo to teach Microsoft through the stock market that you better have a respect for the internet. So that's how that went.
I always call the web web was the great equalizer. I've heard it called. Microsoft had to learn that the hard way.
Yes, yeah. And the big revolution, I think, came with Scott Guthrie. When Scott Guthrie, he's basically the technical upgrade to Bill Gates. When he released ASP.NET MVC, suddenly we had a general industry-wide pattern, model view controller. ASP.NET MVC came with this thing called jQuery. When Microsoft included jQuery in their distribution of ASP.NET MVC, that's when I knew there was a revolution going on at Microsoft. That was but still, it was wrong. It was wrong of me to learn about the web through Microsoft. I spent a lot of time trying to work around that. Even to this day, the Angular distribution of Microsoft's AS4, I think, is done correctly. I don't think it should be coupled in any way to the back end. I think they should be completely separate things because it looks easy from a demo point of view to set up everything all at once. So I was pretty much an outsider until the year. If you really want to cram this into 30 minutes. Until the year 2019. In 2019, I finally met a Microsoft company here in Southern California that recognized the existence of Microsoft after the departure of Steve Ballmer and after the arrival of Scott Guthrie.
Mm-hmm.
So that company is called ProSearch, and they're a company based here in LA in Koreatown. And they were using Angular on the front end
Mm-hmm.
and ASP.NET MVC on the back end, and SQL Server and Elasticsearch. So I spent 1 year working on that. Apart from that, my Angular work has been pretty much in sort of skunkworks projects and my own practice. So in my own practice, I started off on Angularjs, and I was very disappointed with the Angular team with their transition from Angularjs to Angular 2.
Okay. Now we're getting into something. So what was your, I don't. Okay, I will say this. I don't think you're alone in that opinion. But what was your what was your like? Why are you mad now? Like, tell me about what was the trend.
Yes. The thing that everybody that works at Google or one of the big FANG companies has to understand is that I don't care what the people in my position say or smile. We just resent you people for not allowing us to work at your companies because we don't know computer science by heart.
Mm-hmm.
So when you make a mistake in public on that scale, of not even having the architectural vision to foresee that there's going to be an ECMAScript 6, there's going to be, the way the Polymer project is handled. I was going to bring that up as a counterexample, but that's also, they started off on HTML and then they switched over to Java. So it doesn't matter how much rote memorization around for loops and searching B trees you have, if you can't plan your architecture such that it is graceful and seamless all the way through, as beautiful as Macintosh hardware should your architecture roadmap be. When you can't operate on that level, I have a limited respect for these wonderful, intelligent, brilliant people. And that was just a shameful, probably diva fight between architects behind the scenes. I don't care whether I know or not know the details. I see the end product. That transition from 2 to Angular was ridiculous. It was just it was just a mess. And
I do think it did definitely take longer. Well, a few things. It took longer than everybody expected it to, and I think if we take a step back, because I'm going to say that you say you've been Angularjs to Angular, so you've been there for, I guess, since the beginning of Angular 2 at the time, before it just got rebranded. But yeah, the transition to Angular was a lot different. Even just like the mental model of everything was a lot different if we're taking a step back and looking at what Angularjs was and what they were trying to do with Angular and what ended up happening there.
Yeah, it's and a lot of it now what React does conceptually, I think, is elegant. Now React has something called a virtual DOM, which is not the shadow DOM. And I think that should be really talked about, but I'm running out of time. But the
we might have to extend your time, because I want to hear some of this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the React documentation starts off with the word component. So they are already talking about HTML components, and I don't believe Angularjs. Yeah, Angularjs had a concept of a component.
Well, not until later on. Like in the beginning, it was more about directives, and you could build a component that was basically a template, a template and a controller as as a thing, but it wasn't like a codified thing. You couldn't do like dot component until like later versions of AngularJS. But then it kind of solidified more as an upfront thing in Angular in the transition to Angular.
Yeah, because it's important to now in the standards world. Getting back, when I think of the standards world, I think of MDN and Mozilla.
Mm-hmm.
The web component, which really didn't come out until 2018, so I can't really be all super critical of React people, because React people had to do something between between
the powers that we got there on what the standard was going to be.
Yes. So they had to do something. But I think they're going to have to struggle with the explanation of the differences between the virtual DOM and the shadow DOM. Mm-hmm. And the idea, the mantra that they would probably stress is performance. We have a high performance virtual DOM using efficiencies related to changing the DOM. Mm-hmm. And web components is not really about that. So a React person would say these are two completely separate problems. We're trying to solve two completely separate problems. The shadow DOM the shadow DOM could be thought of as a glorified iframe. Mm-hmm. And so that has nothing to do with virtual DOM high performance, right? So I can see that. But the reason why I bring React up is because they started off with the component, the class of the component, recognizing that there are classes in JavaScript. And that's healthy. You can use that concept for a very large time. And then when Microsoft came out with TypeScript, because Anders Heilsberg also is the technical upgrade to Bill Gates. Anders Heilsberg is awesome. Mm-hmm. So with C# and with TypeScript. So this idea of approaching TypeScript on the Node.js stack, that was brought to me through the struggles of Angular. So eventually when Angular figured it out, I think they were under the influence of React culture in that process. I'm sure they're going to say, no, we were not. We're too cool for that. But that's when. Now, getting to NX. I want to get into NX real quick. Get into NX. When Angular first came up, the early versions of Angular, I think all the way up to Angular 6, they had no concept of a library project or a project in general. And that's why I went to NX. NX gave me that. Mm-hmm. So I have a repo called Unicorn Whale that basically celebrates.
That sounds like one of those random GitHub generated names that they come in a new project.
I was trying to recognize Norwal. Right?
Okay. Okay, so you came up with that one.
Yeah. A Norwal is a unicorn whale. It's a unicorn whale.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just so that's what got me into that ecosystem. But when Angular 7 came out, I think they stole that idea from Norwal, and now they have a project structure that's based on that. So what else? Is there anything else in the offering that I'm missing out on, apart from scaffolding and schematics?
Yeah. Well, you mean from the Narwhal side or from the CLI?
Yeah.
Narwhal side.
Narwhal.
Yeah, for NX, the biggest thing that's out there now, or biggest thing that we have now, is NX Cloud, which NX itself has local caching, and then if you want distributed caching across your team, you can use NX Cloud. And what that does is speed up like your build test jobs, build test lint things that you want to run. And if you are touching those areas or making changes to those areas, then you build it once and then that gets cached. And if you don't make changes to those particular areas, and you rebuild those libraries that you mentioned, then those the artifacts, or that we call it computation cache. So those the information that you use, like the command to build that particular library, is cached. So it knows that you haven't changed anything since the last time you ran that. So it can just use the existing build artifacts there. So that use that locally versus then NX Cloud is another offering from Narwhal where you can kind of scale that across your team. So you build it on your machine, it gets pushed up to the cloud. Another person builds it on their machine. Well, they haven't changed anything. So you pull those artifacts down directly from the cloud, and now they have that saved artifacts on their machine without having to rebuild it from scratch. So once you get into larger projects, it really starts to help out there.
Yeah, exactly, because that's the thing you guys are getting into that got me into the Angular in general. Angular had an opinion about how your DevOps workflow is going to run. They had an opinion about that. And it was too open otherwise. If you didn't do Angular, if you did React, you will be using React, but React is not the surface area that React is built for is smaller. That means all the other scaffolding and grunt packages, grunt scripts that eventually became that could become in NPM scripts and all that stuff can be completely different from team to team, company to company to company. So there has to be a just getting that organizational level together. And this is why Java culture has been so superior to Microsoft culture, because they had sort of an academic, formalized approach to building software that Microsoft just didn't have. It was more like mom and pop shops, hardware stores, and eventually SAP, just doing whatever they're going to do. So in the world of JavaScript, Angular, I looked to Angular, in particular, Google in general, to force other companies through peer pressure, stock market, social peer pressure, to standardize how they're going to do what they're going to do. So the learning curve becomes much lower. And it seems like the product that you're talking about takes it even further. It said, we're going to just give you even more stronger opinions about how to develop in this Wild West space. This is really a wild, the JavaScript space is Wild West, a lot of chaos, and that stability is really needed.
Yeah, definitely. That, like you mentioned, Angular itself has opinions. NX has opinions about how you should go about building these apps, and TypeScript, that's just a more opinionated, writing more opinionated JavaScript, I would say. But of course, it gives you a lot more things in addition to that. But yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think the React ecosystem is coming around on TypeScript. I see a lot more React projects using TypeScript more, as opposed to just writing regular JavaScript, just for those some of those benefits of being opinionated about how you structure slinging code everywhere.
Yeah, I have to commend Google for accepting TypeScript, because I thought for sure, based on the social climate of that time, the bro culture of that time, that they would never accept TypeScript because it came from Microsoft, and not invented here. We're not gonna, but they actually embraced it. That was
the same thing. Like when they were talking about, we're going to use TypeScript, and I know they were looking at building their own thing on top of that at one point, but then they ended up ditching that and just using TypeScript itself. I thought, because of course traditionally Angularjs was just vanilla JavaScript, and Angular being in TypeScript, there was additional like tooling that came along with that to be able to build it and everything. And I thought, being more, because I'm like you, I like web standards also, and I thought that they were going to lean more towards staying in line with those standards as far as like ES6 it was called at the time anyway, and building on top of like the web platform, as opposed to building on top of TypeScript, which is like a layer, on top of it, at least from the JavaScript point of view, a layer on top of that. But yeah, it seems like
Yeah.
the web is. I don't want the web isn't completely. The web will never completely embrace TypeScript as a thing, but it has become a tool that a lot of people reach for when building with. Well, of course, you have to do it if you're building with Angular, but like I said, React or even just regular like Node scripts and things like that. People are using TypeScript for that too.
Yep. And now with Angular, I had to learn. Now, 2020. Now, web components came out in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So 2020 was the year I finally had time away from the day job. I finally had time to think about how to incorporate Angular into my world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never about either or. Web components or Angular is about both and. It's like web components and Angular.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically two approaches. If you're going to build a website that is based on documents, like a blog, then I eventually had to learn to start with the document. I actually made the mistake, and I'm sure people who are closer to the world of Google, friends with Ben Lesh, they will snicker at this, but I actually believed for a good month that the search engine, the Google search engine, was going to run JavaScript and parse Angular sites no matter what, because Angular comes from Google and Google search comes from Google. So I thought they would just work together and,
Yeah.
just raise the electric bill just a little bit and just run that JavaScript and parse that. So I actually, my company homepage is an Angular 9 site, which is a mistake. It is but I was so preoccupied with learning Angular in 2016, 2017, maybe 2015, that I was so preoccupied with that I forgot about the SEO story, completely forgot about the SEO story. And I did not realize that I just destroyed my SEO story. You can't find my stuff anymore because I used Angular as my front end, which was a terrible, terrible error. Eventually, I don't know how I did it, but eventually I found 11D. And now for most of the world going over to what they call the jam stack, the younger generation, even younger than you, they would call that the jam stack. They would go over to Jekyll. But I understood culturally that Jekyll is what is that language? Ruby on Rails. Now, even though I love Ruby as a language, Ruby on Rails is a different story. It's a different story, different culture. Don't have time. I was concerned about Node.js, which means JavaScript and TypeScript, and maybe some C running behind JavaScript and TypeScript, similar to Python. You have C libraries that you access through Python. So 11T gives me that. 11T gives me that. Not only that, but they have a Microsoft-like approach to all the templating engines that you would use on your desktop side. You're not going to render this on the server side. You're going to render this on your desktop. And you can use the Shopify Liquid template engine. You can use something called Nunjux, which comes from Mozilla.
I got their blog post up here. How you talking about how you're using 11T for your blog now? Because like I said, from our discussions on Twitter, I was doing the same thing that you're talking about now. I want to build my blog with Angular, or I want to do all the things with Angular, and the blog is going to be one of them. And I had, built my site with Angular, because I wasn't really concerned about SEO at the time. I was just trying to build something that I could host my own content. And and I know that you had gone down that same path, and like you said, had gotten up to a certain point where you had ran into that roadblock of like the SEO roadblock, I'll call it. And then
Yeah, yeah.
you had reached out just recently about how you had kind of worked around that with this
Yeah, and
project.
yeah, and at first when I got into 11D, I could not see how to bring all of my other experience into this world.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably what prevents a lot of experienced veteran programmers from getting into a new technology, because often it's completely separate from
Mm-hmm.
everything else. But then I realized that I have a new paradigm, a 21st century version of progressive enhancement by starting off with Markdown. The revolution for me, because I'm a longtime Microsoft Word user, Microsoft Office user in general, but Microsoft Word user in particular. And my primary document format has been for most of my adult life Microsoft Word.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to switch over to Markdown was a
Like
revolution.
well, I won't say that you lose all that rich text editing, but it's just a different way to. You have to do it a
Yes,
different way than what like mentally you're used to doing it, right?
yes, yeah. Now Donald Knuth, way back in the day, he invented this thing called TEX, latex or text,
Mm-hmm.
TEX. And that was a sort of markup format that allowed you to send data to a printer and it would laser print out this wonderful typeset page. So if you want to do the integral signs, all that stuff, all the mathematical textbook symbols, you could do that with LaTeX. So Markdown feels like that to me. It feels like an updated version of that. And when you get into like Jupyter notebooks, you're
Mm-hmm.
getting into like the Mathematica side of things. So now, of course, this Microsoft move away from Word to Markdown would not be possible without a Microsoft product called Visual Studio Code. It would have been much harder to do this in Sublime Text, you know. So Visual Studio Code makes it much easier just with the spell check alone, just having spell check
Mm-hmm.
to work in Markdown. And I have actually what I explained in the blog post, which I'm sure people are not going, most people aren't going to say this is crazy. I have two repositories,
Okay.
and one is for the Markdown editing, and the other is for all of the front end, basically.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
on
I linked
the
the
Mark,
post. I linked the post so people can. I'll link the post
okay,
in the notes, but I'll showing a link up here so that people can
yeah,
see it, get to it
yeah.
later.
Yeah. So that was a big thing. Just and with a with an 11 generated page, I can include markup that refers to a web component. The
Okay.
web component that I needed for my blog is search. I wanted my own local search, not because of all the misinterpreted things I just said about Google, but because when you do a Google search, Google is not just searching for what you're looking for, it's searching for what you're looking for plus the other things that Google wants to offer you.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you don't want that. You don't want to be, helped in that way. Then you want a pure search of your own data, period. Then you could use something called Lunar.js. It's LUNR,
Mm-hmm.
LUNR.js. And it's basically a tiny client-side version of a little slice of Elasticsearch, basically. So it's a JavaScript library that will take a formatted document, usually in JSON. I use compressed JSON, so I'm sending the file over the wire. Gzipped. It's gzipped.
Mm-hmm.
So I can. So Lunar.js will allow you to do wildcards and all the stuff you might want to use in Lucene or in Elasticsearch, and it'll find things based on how well you put together your index. So the experience is all you see is a blank document. Then, oh look, there's a little web component that searches for all
Mm-hmm.
the other documents. Okay. The next level, which I haven't done yet, the next level is to go to a full-blown Angular experience where you browse through all of the documents.
Okay.
So I already have that built. It's already built, but it's just not seamlessly incorporated with my blog at this time. So you can see how the search can escalate. You can
Mhm.
say, okay, and for those of the people that are actually can think while I'm talking, you're going to say, won't the index get too big? Won't the index get too big? Well, that's where the Angular app comes in. What I plan to do is to basically shard the index by date. So I may go back 5 years in my blog,
Mhm.
but if you want to go back farther than 5 years, you got to go to the Angular app, and the Angular app will load and unload different lunar indexes, sort
Mhm.
of like page, depending on how far back you want to go. And also in the Angular app, you'll be able to group by date and by tag or category. So that's where the Angular app comes in. So now I have a full blown expressive power, starting from nothing, as they say in the old days, from the root to the fruit, starting from nothing,
Mhm.
starting from nothing. That's just a pure HTML document, then to the web component, and then finally to the full blown Angular app. And to me, that brings together my whole career, like in one move there. That's a beautiful unity of all of these technologies across time. Just and so it was wrong. It was not wrong. It was a distraction for the most part for me to just jump directly into a spa app
Mhm.
without trying to bring together. Now, of course, Microsoft is criticized for dragging along its legacy. It makes it work slowly. And I'm an example of that. I work slowly because I'm dragging along all this legacy with me. I just don't drop everything and start with something new. I have to figure out how to incorporate it with the past. And often that could take too damn long to do that. But once it's done, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing once it's done.
Yeah, of course. Once you get all the pieces together, then you're like, oh well, maybe it wasn't that bad. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
like
it's very thin.
I started down that path of building mine with Angular, and then like I said, you lose the SEO story. And like I said, I mentioned this on Twitter, but I had recently just converted over to using Scully, which is a static site generator for Angular, which lets me
Yeah, yeah,
spit out all the HTML files, and hopefully those will be, indexable
yeah,
by uh, Google search, and without me having to do anything about that, and
yeah,
also give you
yeah,
some of that progressive enhancement once the Angular app, gets loaded up. If I actually add anything more interactive to it, but I do
yes,
think that your approach is very interesting as far as mixing in the web components in that way into
yeah,
an
yeah,
app to, like you said, kind of you still get back to a point where you're rendering out, vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then being able for that to be picked up by Google search, or then making some of those things, those more interactive things, like bringing those in as you need to or want to, as opposed to starting from the other direction.
yeah. And the Angular team is ahead of me. They are ahead of me on this one because they have a story for bringing web components into Angular. They have
Mhm.
Angular elements. They also have Angular Universal.
Mhm.
I do recognize the existence of that, but I don't want to have too much. I don't want to treat my servers like pets. I want to treat them like what,
So be
trucks or something.
nice to your servers, is what you're saying.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So I don't want to get into all that stuff. So so there is a way, so you can actually build a web component, work really hard on it, and then use it in Angular.
Hmm.
So that's also possible. And in fact, I'm going to do that. I have this thing I built both in AngularJS and in Angular 9 that looks through YouTube channels, and it's
Hmm.
really based on a Netflix style uh, thumbnail script. It's a responsive thumbnail script.
Hmm.
and you can take the thumbnails of the YouTube videos and show them in different rows. So that experience, I know from a YouTube Google point of view, that's terrible. That's terrible from an advertising per square inch sort of view.
Mhm.
But for me, having to curate a lot of those YouTube, I curate hundreds of channels, so I need that sort of experience. So I can build a thumbnail that only shows one little strip of YouTube channels as a web component, put it in a
Mhm.
plain page, and then escalate to the full-blown Angular app using the same web component. I
Mhm.
haven't tried it yet. I look forward to working on it and trying it. So it's
You're
it's
gonna
you know
you're gonna
so
have your GitHub repo with the rest of your projects, at least the
oh yeah,
ones I.
yeah, everything I mentioned is in the GitHub. I have two different repos. One is for Angular libraries, and another one is for web components. So
Okay.
I'm working on both sides of that story. Now the problem with this is, and this is a problem having to do with me and job interviews, is as I work on web components, I'm forgetting my Angular knowledge. So in case you have a terrible brain that works like mine,
Mhm.
uh, it's better for you. It might be better for you to keep doing what you're doing with Scully,
Mhm.
because if you have to go over to the web component world and take time off to learn that, your Angular knowledge may drop off.
Mhm.
So I have to go reboot my Angular knowledge now to put it all together.
Okay. Well, we'll be looking forward to see what you build there. Like I said, I linked your GitHub repo there for people to see, and I believe I got your Twitter handle, Bryan D. Wilhite on Twitter. Is that right?
Just Brian Will, like no,
Bryan Wilhite. All
yeah,
right. There you go. Brian Wilhite. Sorry, I thought I changed that one or made that
no,
correct. Made it incorrect. So there you go. But yeah, Brian Wilhite, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your knowledge about all these
yeah.
topics, and I look forward to uh, following what you do with 11T and
Mhm.
your blogging, and seeing what you continue to do there.
All right, thank you. I think you're doing a great job here on Twitch. You're in the right place because Microsoft just closed their thing. So
So like
yeah,
I picked
Mixer,
up
Mixer.
the right one at the right time. So that
Yes,
counts for something.
yes, yes.
All
All
right.
right, thank you, man. You're doing great work, and I saw your talk. I think you're doing great work.
I appreciate it. And for everyone else, we'll see y'all in the chat next time, and I'll update the show notes with the links and the things that we talked about today, so you can get them there. But we'll see y'all next
All
time.
right, all right. Thank you.